we're pleased to welcome Joy Beeland. Joy Beeland, having a long history of assessing cybersecurity needs and implementing solutions. Joy is now the Senior Cybersecurity Consultant and Professional Instructor and CMMC and Training Program Manager for Edwards Performance Solutions. She oversees curriculum development and live instructor training for CMMC AB approved certification courses, as well as customized insider threat and security awareness training for worldwide enterprise clients. Very happy to have you, Joy. Thank you. Welcome. Are you mic'd up?
I think so.
Oh, great.
I will be live, and oh, good. Here we go.
Alive. You are alive.
Well, this is awesome. I'm so excited to be here. You know, I've presented, it feels like hundreds of times on CMMC, and then Stacy Bostanovich stole my thunder today, so I'm going to have to talk to you guys about insider threat instead. A little bit about me, and I don't mean to PowerPoint anyone to death, but I think a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I'm going to do my whole thing using a lot of animation and PowerPoint here, and have you guys keep up with me. So as soon as top secret password has to be typed in, I'm not looking. Oh, look at that. And presentation mode. Okay. Excellent. All right. So, insider threat. I like to call it insider risk. That's not what it's called commonly in the framework that we're going to be talking about, but I'm a student of human nature and the human element, and I'm really excited to be here and talk about this. We'll see if we can, there we are. The only thing you really want to know about me is that I'm very active in CMMC. Not only am I a provisional assessor, provisional instructor, I'm an advisor to a firm in DC called Viance Group, and they specialize in insider threat to a lot of nation states. And, sorry, go back one. There we are. And I did some training at Carnegie Mellon for the vulnerability assessor for insider threats and for the program management of insider threats. I did that before I started working in CMMC, and then I was thrilled to see what we're going to be talking about today as part of the CMMC program. So in going to the actual description of what is the insider threat and why.
It's a little finicky.
Yeah, I'm pushing it. Come on, buddy. Am I aiming in the wrong direction, or? I'll just use the buttons if I have to. I'm normally a caged animal up here, taking advantage of the whole thing. Thank you. All right, so the description of an insider is something that we need to be paying attention to, but basically it's anybody that has access to your critical information, right? And they could wittingly or unwittingly do harm as a result of having that access. So this is not just in the defense industrial base. This is everywhere. If you have not seen espionage or stolen data or IP theft in the news, then you have not been watching the news. It's making more and more news all the time. So the whole category of insider threat in cybersecurity is something that people are really paying attention to now. I like that little guy. Normally, I have like 45 minutes to do these, and then I was told that I have 20 minutes. So instead of like walking through each of these in a graceful like little stroll today, we're going to just do our sprint to get to the end. But these are the things that we're going to cover. So when you look at the different categories of insider threat, there are so many that we could be covering. And what I've done is I've chosen the ones in blue to talk about because they would most commonly affect an organization that's in the defense industrial base or those of us who are trying to protect those organizations, okay? So we'll go ahead and we'll start out with the unintentional. Now, in the days of security awareness training, everyone knows what that is now, right? Trying to protect the users from themselves, basically, because they were given a loaded gun, which is their computer, and you said, go out there and multiply and conquer, and they didn't know how to use the loaded gun. So we're trying to make sure that anyone that is unintentionally going to cause harm knows what to watch for, right? This is different, though, from the category of somebody that's negligent, who really just doesn't care, Or it's kind of like, well, wouldn't be the worst thing if we had to close for 4 days because of ransomware and I'd have a little free vacation time, right? So the unintentional, 67% of the threats for unintentional are coming in from phishing emails, and a full 94% of all the malicious activity deployed on networks generally is coming in through email systems in general. So unintentional, the last figure I saw from Carnegie Mellon is that 58% of insider risk is brought in through the unintentional vector. So security awareness training plays a huge role in this, right? The next thing that we're going to look at is IT sabotage. This one just kills me because I had a managed service provider business for 21 years. My ex and my current fiance always are saying, man, IT people are kind of strange. Just in general, right? Like, It's not the same person. No, thank goodness. There's a reason one is an ex. But IT sabotage, if you think about it, these guys and girls have the keys to the kingdom. And we're talking about a lot of zero trust principles today, but when it comes to who's doing the IT for your business, whether they're internal or they're outsourced, that can't be a zero trust relationship. There has to be implicit trust and them being able to administer for you what they need to, right? So they have all of the technical access paths, or they establish them. It's very hard to know what they're doing behind your back. It's very hard to have accountability and traceability for their actions, especially for the smaller businesses in the DIB. They have the ability to conceal their activities. A lot of the damage caused by IT sabotage is after they have left the employment. So if they're a direct employee of yours and you fire them, you don't know what kind of logic bomb they may have set. And this is something that is talked about a lot in insider threat training for organizations, is make sure you know what those access paths are. Make sure you know before you let anyone go, whether it's in the IT department or not, that you've cut off all access to the system, and you can only do that if you know what their access paths are, right? If it's a MSP or outsourced IT, how do you know if that person is no longer with the MSP, but they show up at your door and they're saying that they're there to do some service or do some harm in retaliation? The next one is espionage. And when we were talking this morning, one of the first things that we saw in that one, I forget who it was, a great presenter that was talking about the different nation states. And 3 of them, China, Russia, North Korea, their number one thing that they're doing is espionage, right? Espionage is very real. So there's corporate espionage, where they're just trying to steal your secrets on behalf of the competition. That's a very real thing. If you're in the defense industrial base, you likely have IP, intellectual property, that could be a trade secret just as valuable as the CUI, right? And so the corporate espionage is definitely something, you have an employee leave, they've downloaded your entire contact list out of Salesforce, they have all of the tech drawings that they've been working on for years, what have you. And then we have the economic espionage, and this is what is brought up with the nation states, basically. So trying to take advantage and gain a technical advantage through espionage. So when you come to espionage and IP theft, that category of IP theft falls under espionage in the insider threat world, just so you know. And more than half of the US exports have revenue associated with intellectual property. So $840 billion in annual revenues is what we're looking at for the United States. And there's when I was at CS2 in San Diego, we had somebody that was, I think the mayor of San Diego, walked in, and the very first thing he said was this quote about the amount of wealth that is leaving our country, the largest exodus of wealth in the history of the United States. That's because we have so much intellectual property, hence the importance of the insider theft, insider threat. So $600 billion is estimated to be what is being lost. Look at that. I mean, that's a pretty substantial figure right there, and 2.1 million American jobs. So this is something that is really important to address. The last category I'm going to talk about is fraud. So fraud really falls into three different buckets or ways that fraud occurs in an organization. And there is things like contractual fraud when we're talking about the DCMA and how that contract flows down all the way down. There's ways that an organization may want to have a sub supposedly be doing the work, but then they want to do that work themselves. So there's ways within CMMC and the defense industrial base that fraud occurs, but large and above that is the fact that most fraud is committed by somebody in a very low-level position. So they're underpaid or low-level pay. They have access to a lot of processes, and then they don't have things set up that are going to be making sure that they don't have the opportunity or ability to commit fraud, right? So in CMMC, that's making sure that you have a second person that's always authenticating or separation of roles and duties, right? But what happens in fraud is that there's some kind of financial pressure, financial problems, somebody's going through a divorce, they got really sick during COVID, they're going to be losing their house now, they have addiction issues, they're going have child care, all kinds of stressors that are happening. On top of that, they have the ability, the opportunity, and the means to commit the fraud because they're not being properly monitored in how their role was set up, weak internal controls, and they rationalize it. And this is really important, the rationalization and the attitude, because by and large, when these people are caught, they feel like it was owed to them. Really interesting. So the other thing about insider risk is that I said internal. When we started and I showed you the definition of what is an insider risk, and it's an insider or internal person, but a lot of organizations like my company, Edwards Performance Solutions, we do a ton of contracting with government agencies and for government programs as program managers, project managers. So we have our own staff going and behaving as if they are internal staff with other large organizations and government agencies. We also bring people in. Jacob is one of my provisional instructors for the classes that we teach. So he has access to all of our IP that we use in developing our curricula and in how we deliver our classes, right? And so we bring in contractors ourselves. And when you consider who has access to sensitive information, you have to consider all of these other entities. And this is especially hard. Like in my MSP, I dealt with a lot of nonprofits who had volunteers with their own devices who had access to donor lists and grant amounts and all kinds of stuff. It's like this is something through every different industry. It's going to permeate in a different way. But you always have to look at those external contractors. So what happens in insider threat? There's different stages throughout the process before an individual will cause harm to an organization where it could have been stopped. It could have been identified, and it could have been mitigated. And in these different stages, it's called the critical pathway. The very first part of the critical pathway is a personal predisposition. So what does that mean? If you're doing your background checks, that's one thing. Okay, so they haven't claimed bankruptcy and they have a driver's license. That's one way of looking at it. But what if you go on social media and you see that they are affiliated with groups that claim allegiance to other nations? If they're extremists in some way? What if they are ranting on and on about an ex and they're very abusive to that person on social media, right? What if you find out that when they left their last job, nobody will talk about it, and then you finally get a hold of someone and they're like, yeah, that dude was weird, or that girl was like, nobody understood what was happening. So there's personal predispositions that you can clue into if you do a deeper background check. The next thing is the stressors. So we just talked about this with the fraud. Like there could be a divorce happening. All of a sudden they're drinking a lot more. Their kids, thank you. Their kids are having problems in school, that being the whole stay-at-home parent has caused a lot of anxiety, whatever those stressors are. So they have a personal predisposition and they have these personal stressors. You might even notice that they're no longer buying lunch when everyone goes out to lunch and they don't want to come because they can't afford it. Something that small could be an indication that there's something a lot bigger going on. The next thing, the concerning behavior. So the concerning behavior could be they're showing up with their hair really unkempt. They stop showering more than once a week. Their clothes are wrinkly. They seem to be checking their mobile device a lot and gambling a lot. They're hungover a lot more often. They're complaining really loud about things. They're disagreeing with a lot of people in the company. So these are like a shift in personality that starts to get a little bit exacerbated, right? The next thing is they start to display insider threat-like behaviors. Now this is really important. I'm going to show you on the next slide. This is going to tie in a completely different way than what you're expecting, I hope. But these insider threat-like behaviors, now they're starting to get mean. Now they are starting to like retaliate against the leadership, or they're being really, really vocal. You guys want me to sign that, cybersecurity compliance, and I'm not going to do it this time. And they start to get really vocal and maybe even bully people, right? And don't show up the way that they're supposed to show up, whatever that is. And there's a problematic way that the organization responds to it. So the business unit manager is like, I've had it. I can't deal with her anymore. We need her to get out of our department. She's being passed over for a promotion. The passed over for promotion, believe it or not, is a really big one. Being demoted, even bigger, as you can imagine, because these are public displays where this person is being identified for their problematic behavior. But the way that the organization responds to it, rather than handling it in a way that is sensitive, that dives into, and we'll talk a little bit more about best practices, but that dives into maybe what is actually going on to try and mitigate it at that point is something that is problematic. And that's when the individual goes and causes the harm. Out of like 850 insider threat cases at Carnegie Mellon, the majority of them at every single step display some kind of pattern here. So these are really important to know about, and these are the things that you should be training your staff on. So what do you watch for? And this is where I'm going to show you a little bit of twist on this towards the end. I'm going to go ahead and populate all of these. You probably know somebody right now. You're reading all of these and going, oh my God, that's my grandson. But if you look at these on their own, that's human life. That's we all, at one time or another, we're all displaying some kind of trait like this. When you start to see a mixture or a combination of these show up in somebody, and they weren't like that when you hired them, or you didn't see that on the radar, these are the warning signs. So for CMMC, there's a domain called awareness and training, and this is where I got all excited after I finished all my insider threat training, and then I joined Edwards, and I'm going to be teaching CMMC, and I'm going through all of the practices, and I'm like, hell yeah! Finally, I see, well, we did see, at level 2, thank you, the very first practice it calls for is role-based security awareness. So just security awareness training, but role-based means if you're the guy in the accounting department that signs the checks, should that person have extra training on something like fraud, on phishing emails, on spear phishing, on business email compromise? Like, make sure that you are identifying, according to the rules in the organization, the best security awareness training available for them. The next one, role-based information security specific training. So we were just talking in this last panel about reporting incidents within 72 hours, making sure that you have the forensics available for it. That is role-based specific training that should be identified so that when an assessor comes in and says, how does your IT department handle it when somebody complains about another person's behavior, or that they think that they've had some kind of a breach, they're going to want to see some kind of traceability to this. But then the third one, where the money is the insider threat awareness training, and I was really happy to see this. So The statement of this capability is to provide security awareness training on recognizing and reporting potential indicators of insider threat or potential indicators of compromise. So, and reporting, recognizing and reporting. That critical pathway that I just walked you all through, that is something that every person in your organization should know about, at least for the intellectual property part of what you do, no matter what kind of an organization you have. But if you also have CUI, guess what? It's a requirement, okay? So all of those things that I just showed you are actually a requirement. The objectives that an assessor is going to look for is that you've identified the types of insider threats specific to your organization. Remember when I showed you the categories at the beginning and I had blue and green? I gave you all the categories, and then I said I'm going to identify the ones I think are more specific to this audience. You can do that too, right? Drill on the ones that will make the most sense for you. And then training on recognizing and reporting those indicators is provided to managers and employees. And when I say employees, I don't mean just employees. Who else do I mean? External contractors who are coming in as a team member, the 1099s. I told my staff at Edwards, if you're a 1099 working on site with another agency, ask them if they have insider threat training that you should be participating in. Let's get in front of it, okay? So, how do we do this though? What I just laid out for training may seem super simple. What I laid out when I said these are what's required with CMMC, those 3 different areas of training, you might be able to do that with an automated platform, and you might be able to get away with trying to do that once a year. Will that actually affect change in your organization? Hell no, right? You have to have a model and a plan. I'm going to suggest this one just because I think it's super cool. So the ADKAR model gives you a 5-point process in being able to affect change in the culture of an organization. That's why this is called the CMMC culture and insider threat, because the culture of the entire organization and the business partners you have is going to need to change to support this. On top of that, your plan is to train everybody on what to watch for, create the associated procedures, make sure you have best practices, reduce uncertainty. One of the things that we saw earlier in a session was the permission to say no. What that actually was translated to that I saw earlier is everyone's rushing to get their job done as fast as they can. Everyone has all of these pressures, and customer service is the name of the game now, right? We all have our deadlines and our deliverables. Excuse me. We have to give our employees the ability to slow down and question legitimacy. We must reinforce that as equally valuable to meeting the customer demands, or the change will not happen in the organization. And then encouraging the reporting. Now, what does encouraging reporting look like? At Edwards, we have an employee suggestion box. It was there long before I came along and said, let's do insider threat training for our team, right? It turns out the employee suggestion box at the very bottom of it says employee name is optional, and this is 100% anonymous if they want it to be. It was already in place on our SharePoint system, and I said, cool, let's use that. Super simple, right? We did a 1-hour training. I made it specific to our organization, and then I said, this is how you can report concerning behaviors. Now, the important thing is when you have a plan and a program set out, the way that that is handled once it's reported must be consistent. I'm not a lawyer. I know that you guys didn't know that. But I'm going to tell you, consistency is super important here. Now, I only have a minute left, so I'm going to get straight to. When I was told I only had 20 minutes, I'm like, but I have such great best practices, Ryan. And so what I did is I put them into handouts for everybody, and you get to read them. So we have best practices for technical insiders. How do you handle those IT pros? HR and training, and contractors and third parties. Lists for you to go off of here, okay? So see me after the training, and I'll be happy to share that out with you. I'm not going to go through the cost of noncompliance because that was just handled. Thank you very much. CMMC self-attestation. Here's the twist that I was promising you. when we come to self-attestation and the responsibility for a principal of the organization to sign off that they are meeting the CMMC requirements at level 1, maybe now at level 2, surprise, surprise, with the new bifurcation added back in at a small level, the False Claims Act is going to be a huge deal here. The thing that I think is really fascinating about this is, remember when I showed you this slide about the deliberate actor? Each of these different traits on how somebody is behaving is likely going to be what you see in a whistleblower. But a whistleblower is going to have completely different protections available to them. And the way that the organization handles an insider threat, potentially doing espionage or IP theft, and they're suspicious because they're copying large amount of data, versus a whistleblower is something that everybody needs to have on their radar. This is why the culture is so important, because the recognizing the indicators of the behavioral changes and being able to have a good insider threat program where you're combining HR and training and changing the culture of the company is the only way that this can be mitigated properly. So your key takeaways, just like the panelists said right before me, I'm so thrilled the way that you set this up that I get to just echo what was already said by the real experts here. Make sure everyone understands why all of this is happening. Encourage them to report, make it a really good thing, and to show concern about the people that they're seeing displaying these different behaviors, and go beyond compliance, make this a real culture change. And that's what I got for you today. Oh, one more. Implement the program.
Thank you.